The ceremony seemed ordinary until he saw the bride was the king's daughter. The alien horns sounded before the doors even opened. Lieutenant Cole Harmon had been on 6 planets in 4 years, had signed more alliance contracts than he could count, and had sat through enough interstellar ceremonies to know how they work. You stand still. You smile. You don't touch anything that glows. He knew the rules. He had followed them without question on every single assignment. Until tonight, the hall on the planet Vareth was enormous. Carved from a single black mountain, the ceiling disappeared into darkness above. The floor was polished to a mirror shine that reflected the torchlight in long orange ribbons across the stone. Hundreds of Varathian nobles stood in rows on either side of the central aisle, their silver ceremonial robes brushing the floor. Each one wore a metal band across their eyes, which was their tradition during the opening of a contract ceremony. Nobody looked at anyone else during the first moments. It was considered a form of respect. Cole stood at the back of the human delegation's second row, right side. There were 12 humans in total, led by Ambassador Felix Grant, a man with gray temples and a calm voice who had been doing this job since before Cole was born. Beside Cole stood Lieutenant Nora Walsh, his partner on this assignment. She had already counted the exits. He knew because she always did. They had been working together for 2 years, and he could read her the way most people read weather. The ceremony was called the Binding of Voices. It was the final step in a trade agreement that had taken 3 years to negotiate. Once the ceremony was complete, humanity would have access to the Vararian deep space lanes, which would cut travel time between Earth's outer colonies by 60%. The entire future of human expansion in this region of space rested on what happened in this room in the next 2 hours. Cole did not think anything would go wrong. Then the bride walked in. She came through the far doors, which were tall enough to fit a cargo ship sideways. She walked alone, ahead of any attendants, which was unusual. She wore white and gold, which meant she was the party being offered in the binding, the one whose future was being sealed by the contract. The Varithians had explained this part of the ceremony, a symbolic union. The bride represented the planet's commitment. Her walk down the aisle represented Vareth giving its word. Cole watched her because it was polite to watch. Everyone watched. Then she turned her head slightly, and Cole saw her face clearly for the first time. He knew that face. Not from this planet, not from any planet he had ever visited professionally. He knew it from a photograph, framed in silver, sitting on the desk of King Aldrath, the 4th supreme ruler of the Varathian Empire, in every official portrait ever released to the human diplomatic corps. The photograph always showed the king with his 3 children, the eldest son, the middle son, and the daughter whose name was Irene, daughter who was 17 years old. Cole stopped breathing for exactly 3 seconds. He did the math without meaning to. The Varathians came of age at 30 by their own calendar, which converted to 26 human years. Irene, by that same conversion, was not even close to their own legal threshold. She was a child by every standard that existed on Earth, on Vareth, or anywhere in between. Ambassador Grant had not moved. None of the other humans had moved. Cole could not tell if any of them recognized her. They had all reviewed the royal family files during briefing, but the photograph of the princess was small and formal and taken when she was younger. The woman walking down that aisle was dressed for a ceremony and surrounded by light that softened everything. Cole recognized her because he had a memory for faces that had gotten him into trouble before, and out of it more often. Nora leaned 2 inches toward him. She did not turn her head. Her voice was barely a sound. "Cole, I see it," he said. "Grant doesn't know. I'm going to tell him. You move right now, and you break protocol in front of 400 Veracity nobles during the binding opening. That's an insult that doesn't have a diplomatic fix. Not moving is worse. You don't know that yet. You don't know what this is. It could be symbolic. It could be a title. The word bride doesn't always mean what we think it means." She stopped there and turned to face the human delegation. Her eyes moved across the rows of humans with an expression that was difficult to read. Not fear, something older than fear. Something that had already accepted what was coming and was simply waiting. That expression ended the argument in Cole's head. "I'm telling him," Cole said. He took one step forward, then another. He moved as quietly as he could, which was not quiet enough. Heads turned. A murmur ran through the nearest Varathian nobles like a current through water. Ambassador Grant turned, saw Cole approaching, and his eyes went sharp with warning. Cole reached him and leaned close. "That is Princess Irene," Cole said, "the king's daughter. She is 17 years old." Grant's expression did not change on the outside, but something happened behind his eyes. A very fast, very quiet reckoning.
"You are certain?" Grant said.
Grant was quiet for 4 full seconds. The ceremony was still proceeding around them. The officiant had begun to speak in Varathian. The words were being translated into their earpieces, but Cole was not listening to the words. Grant straightened and turned to face the front of the hall. "Stay close," Grant said, "and do not react to anything I do next." Then the ambassador raised his hand and spoke loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "We pause," Grant said in a Varathian. With respect, the officiant stopped mid-sentence. The entire hall went still, and 400 pairs of Varathian eyes turned to look at the humans. Cole had broken the ceremony. There was no going back now. The silence in that hall had a weight to it, not the comfortable silence of pause or consideration. This was the kind of silence that precedes consequences. Cole could feel it in the base of his skull, the way you feel a pressure change before a storm, that animal certainty that the air itself is rearranging around something incoming. Ambassador Felix Grant stood with his hand still slightly raised, the gesture of pause now hanging in the air between the human delegation and 400 Varathian nobles who had not expected any human to speak during the binding opening. The officiant, a tall Varathian elder with silver markings along both forearms, had gone completely still. His face was unreadable, in the way that trained diplomats go unreadable, meaning he was working extremely hard to keep it that way. Irene, standing in the center of the hall, had not moved. She was watching Grant. Only Grant, her expression had shifted by a degree so small that most people would have missed it. Cole did not miss it. It was the faintest softening around the eyes. Not relief. Not yet. Something more careful than relief, like a person who has been told a door might be unlocked but has not yet reached out to test the handle. Grand Vizier, Offren, stepped forward from the Varathian side. He was the king's voice in any formal proceeding. A broad man with a deep ceremonial sash and the kind of stillness that comes from decades of managing situations in which something had gone sideways. "Ambassador," Offren said, in careful but fluent English, which itself was a signal. Choosing English meant he wanted this conversation to stay between them for as long as possible, away from the Varathian ears in the room who might understand their own language but not the human one. "You have interrupted the binding opening." "This is not done, I am aware," Grant said, "and I extend sincere apology for the disruption. I ask only for a brief pause. A private word between our delegations before we continue. The binding opening does not pause. Then, let us speak quickly, here, as it proceeds around us. I mean no insult to Varith, or to the ceremony. I mean only to ensure that what we are binding is what we believe we are binding." Offren studied Grant for a moment. His eyes moved to Cole, measured and deliberate, and then back. He turned and walked to a side chamber door, without waiting to see if they would comply. Grant followed. Cole followed Grant. Nora stayed with the remaining human delegation, her face professionally neutral, which meant she was extremely tense. The side chamber was small and lit with blue light from a single overhead panel. The walls were bare stone. Offren closed the door behind them, and the sounds of the hall muffled into something distant. "Speak plainly," Offren said. "The young woman standing in the center of your hall," Grant said. "Is she Princess Irene, daughter of King Aldrich?" The Grand Vizier did not answer immediately. "Yes," he said finally. "She is 17 years old by human calculation. She is of an age appropriate to Varathian custom. I also understand that the binding contract we are here to sign includes a clause in Section 9 regarding symbolic union, which our translation team rendered as ceremonial and representative in nature. Are you telling me that this clause is literal? That the princess is not symbolic, but is herself the subject of the agreement? Othering folded his hands. The binding of voices has always included a living representative of the ruling family. This is not new. This was in the contract materials. The clause described a union representative. It did not specify age, identity, or legal standing. If we had understood that the king's minor daughter was to be named in this agreement as a living participant, we would have raised questions long before tonight. It is an honor. Grant's voice stayed even. Grand Vizier, I want to be direct with you, because I believe you are a man who values directness. Humanity cannot enter into any agreement that names a child as a living participant in a binding contract, regardless of what that participation involves, ceremonially or legally. This is not a cultural judgment. It is a line that our laws and our ethics do not allow us to cross. If we sign tonight as planned, the agreement will be invalidated the moment it reaches Earth Council for review, and 3 years of negotiation will be lost for both of us. Cole stood slightly behind Grant and watched the Grand Vizier's face. The man was thinking at speed. This was not a simple cultural misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with apology. This was structural. The king had built his daughter into the foundation of the agreement. Changing that tonight meant either renegotiating a core term or halting the ceremony entirely, both of which carried consequences that had not been accounted for. The king, Otherin said slowly, has strong feelings about the form of this agreement, and I have enormous respect for those feelings and for Barathian tradition. I am asking whether there is a path forward that honors the spirit of the binding while modifying the specific form of participation. Is there another member of the royal family or a senior court representative who could stand in the representative role tonight? That is not how it is done. I am asking whether it could be done differently. Cole thought about irony, standing in the center of the hall. He thought about the expression on her face, the one that was not quite hope. He'd thought about 3 years of human work and Varithian patience, and the 60% reduction in travel time, and the colonies that needed those lanes. He thought about all of it, pressing down on this small stone room, and on the 2 men standing in it. I would need to speak to the king, Otherin said. That is all I am asking, Grant said. Otherin moved to the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. You understand, he said, that if the king refuses this request and you choose not to proceed, the consequences for the trade agreement will be permanent. Vareth does not renegotiate a binding that has been interrupted. I understand, Grant said. Grant stood very still for a moment after the door closed. Then he turned to Cole. How certain were you? He said. Completely certain, Cole said. I ran the facial comparison in my head against the official portrait. The bone structure is identical. There is no question. Grant nodded slowly. If you had not spoken, we would have signed an agreement naming a 17-year-old child as a bound participant. The council would have torn it apart inside a week, and we would have looked either complicit or incompetent. You also interrupted a 400-year-old ceremony in front of the entire Varithian court. Grant was quiet for a moment. Then he said something Cole did not expect. Good, Grant said. That was the right call. Cole did not answer. He was watching the door and thinking about what the king would say, and what would happen to those trade lanes, and what would happen to Irenine either way, and whether the right call and the good outcome were going to end up being the same thing. They were not always the same thing. He waited to find out which this was. King Aldroth came into the side chamber without announcement. Cole had been in the presence of leaders before, heads of state, military commanders, figures who carried authority in their posture and expected the room to rearrange itself around them. Aldroth was different. He was not performing authority. He simply had it the way a cliff face has height, not because it is trying, but because that is what it is. He was tall, even by Varithian standards. His ceremonial robe was deep black with gold at the edges. He wore no crown during the binding ceremony. No physical marker of his rank. He did not need one. The Grand Vizier followed 3 paces behind him and closed the door. King Aldroth looked at Ambassador Grant for a long moment without speaking. Then he looked at Cole with the same unhurried attention. Then he spoke in Berathian. Ofren translated, without being asked. The king says, "You stopped my ceremony." Grant inclined his head, with deep respect and sincere apology for the form of the interruption. The intent was not to dishonor Verret. The king spoke again. He says, "Othrin has told me what you said. I want to hear it from you directly." Grant met the king's eyes and spoke clearly and without softening any of it. He explained what Cole had identified. He explained the legal and ethical position of humanity regarding minors and binding agreements. He explained what would happen to the contract if it was signed as structured and then reviewed by Earth's governing council. He did not frame any of it as Varathian wrongdoing. He framed it as an incompatibility that neither side had caught in time, which was the generous version of the truth, and also, Cole believed, the accurate one. The clause translation had genuinely been ambiguous. Whether that ambiguity was deliberate was a question no one in this room was going to ask out loud. Aldrich listened to all of it. Then he spoke for a long time in Varethian. Afruthren translated in segments. The king says, "Irony came to me 6 months ago and asked to stand in this ceremony. She was not ordered, she was not assigned. She asked. She told me she wanted Vera's future to have her name attached to it. I agreed because I believed in her understanding of what she was asking." The king says, "I did not know that your people would see her participation as a legal matter rather than a ceremonial one." In Varithian tradition, the living representative holds no binding obligation. She is a witness and a symbol. Nothing is taken from her. Nothing is demanded of her after tonight. The contract does not name her as a party. It names her as the voice of Vareth's intention. The king says, "I wonder if your lieutenant, who noticed my daughter's face and chose to speak, understands the difference between what he feared and what was actually happening." Cole held the king's gaze and answered before Grant could, with respect. Cole said, "I did not know the difference when I spoke. All I knew was what I saw and what I feared it meant. If I was wrong about the nature of her participation, I am glad to be wrong, but I would make the same choice again with the same information. I would rather interrupt a ceremony and be corrected than stay silent and later learn the worst was true." Othrin translated. The king was still for a moment. Then something shifted in his face. Not warmth exactly. Something more like recognition. The king spoke 2 words. Frethrin said, he says, "Fair answer." Grant exhaled quietly beside Cole, which was the only sign of relief he allowed himself. "Is there a path forward?" Grant asked. "One that satisfies Varethian tradition, while allowing the human delegation to proceed with full confidence in the agreement's legal standing on our side." Cole stood and watched, and did not move. Then Othrin spoke in English. "The king proposes this. Irony will remain as the ceremony's living representative, as planned, but the binding document will include an addendum, drafted tonight and signed by both parties before the ceremony resumes, clarifying the ceremonial nature of her participation and confirming no legal obligation attaches to her person. This addendum will be part of the official record." Grant looked at Cole. Cole gave a single small nod. "We accept," Grant said. Aldrich spoke one more time. "The king says, the addendum will be drafted by Lieutenant Harmon and Grand Vizier Etherin together. The king wishes the human who raised the concern to be the one who resolves it." Cole had not expected that. "I am not a lawyer," Cole said. Othrin almost smiled. "Neither am I. We will have 2 of them brought in. You and I will sit with them and make sure the language is honest." Grant said, "Go." Cole followed Othrin out of the side chamber and into a smaller corridor. The sounds of the hall were a low murmur through the walls. The ceremony was on hold. 400 Varerian nobles were waiting. The future of the trade lanes was sitting in a pause. Cole and Holverin walked side by side toward a lit doorway at the corridor's end. "You have done this before," Others said. It was not a question. "Interrupted ceremonies?" Cole said. "Spotted the thing everyone else missed." Cole thought about that. Sometimes it is a useful quality in a diplomat. "I'm a lieutenant tonight," Othrin said. "You were both." They walked through the doorway together. and behind them the stone hall waited, and Irene stood in the center of it, still patient and still and watching the door through which the answer would eventually come. The addendum took 40 minutes to draft. Cole sat across from Grand Vizier Ephrathon at a narrow table with 2 Varatian legal scholars and 1 human contract specialist named Donna Alves, who had been pulled from the back of the delegation and arrived with a tablet under her arm and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was thorough and fast, and she asked the right questions without any noise around them. The document they produced was 4 paragraphs long. It stated clearly that the living representative named in the binding ceremony held no legal standing as a contractual party. It confirmed that her participation was ceremonial and symbolic under Varatian tradition. It specified that no obligation, restriction, or agreement attached to her person as a result of the ceremony. It was signed by Ofren on behalf of Vareth and by Grant on behalf of humanity, witnessed by Cole and Donna. Cole read it 3 times before he confirmed it was right. Then, the ceremony resumed. Irene walked the second half of the aisle, with the same steadiness she had shown before the pause, as if 400 people holding their breath had not been waiting for her to reappear. She reached the front of the hall and took her place beside the officiant. Her eyes moved once to the human delegation, a brief sweep that landed on Cole for a moment, before continuing. Cole did not look away. The binding of voices proceeded as designed. The Varathian officiant spoke the ancient language of the contract. Grant and Aldrich signed the physical document, each in their own script, side by side on the same page. Irene pressed her hand to a small panel of warm stone embedded in the podium, the symbolic act at the ceremony's center, the gesture that meant Vareth's living future had witnessed the agreement. When it was done, the hall filled with sound, not applause as humans understood it. Varatians struck their right palm against their left forearm in a slow, steady rhythm that built across all 400 bodies, until the stone walls held the sound like a drum. Cole stood in the rhythm of it and felt something he did not entirely have a name for. After the ceremony, there was a reception, Varethian food that tasted like salt and citrus and something faintly mineral. Music played on instruments that had no human equivalent. Grant moved through the room doing what he was extraordinary at, which was making every person he spoke to feel like they were the most important conversation he had had all evening. Cole stood near the back with a drink he had not touched. Nora appeared beside him. "Addendum worked?" she said. "Addendum worked. King still angry?" I don't think angry was ever quite the right word for what he was. Nora was quiet for a moment. "You know the Varethian press is going to run something on the pause." Human delegation interrupted the binding. "That will be the headline for a day or 2, probably. Grant will handle it." Nora picked up a small Varethian pastry from a passing tray, examined it, and ate it. What was she like? The princess. Cole thought about Irene standing in the center of the hall during the pause. The expression that was not quite hope. The steadiness of someone who had done a hard thing by choice and was waiting to see if the world would let it stand. "She asked to be there," Cole said. Nora looked at him. "The king told us." She went to him and asked. She wanted Vareth's future to have her name on it. Nora was quiet with that for a moment. "Yeah," and she still asked. "Yeah." Across the room, Irene was speaking with 2 vibration nobles, her posture easy, her hands moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who had grown up inside this world and knew exactly where she stood in it. She caught Cole's eye again across the distance and held it for a second, then turned back to her conversation. Cole finally took a drink. The trade lanes were secured. The agreement was signed. The addendum was part of the record. Everything that needed to happen had happened, and the 3-year negotiation had not collapsed on the floor of a stone hall on a planet carved from a black mountain. But Cole kept thinking about the moment before any of that, the moment when he was standing in the second row, right side, and Irene had walked through those doors, and he had recognized a face that no one else in his delegation had recognized. He had not done something complicated. He had not executed a strategy. He had simply seen something and said so, in the only window of time when saying so could still matter. It was the smallest possible version of courage, the kind that costs almost nothing and changes everything. He thought about Nora's words. You spotted the thing everyone else missed. He thought about what Otherin had said in the corridor. Tonight, you were both. He did not know if that was true, but he knew the moment he had been standing in and the choice inside it, and he knew he would make it the same way again, on any planet, in any hall, in front of any number of eyes. The ceremony had looked ordinary, until it wasn't, and the man who had noticed was already planning to be unremarkable again by morning. Some days that was enough. Some days it was everything. The news cycle moved fast, even this far from Earth. By the time the human delegation boarded their transit vessel for the return journey, 2 Verithian media sources had already published pieces on the pause. Cole read them on a tablet in the ship's small common area while the others slept. Neither piece was hostile. Both described the pause as a diplomatic consultation and noted the addendum as evidence of the 2 civilizations' commitment to mutual clarity. One piece quoted an anonymous Verithian court official as saying that the human delegation had demonstrated exactly the kind of careful attention that long-term alliance required. Cole put the tablet down and looked at the ceiling. Grant appeared from the corridor, holding 2 cups of something hot. He set one in front of Cole without asking and sat across from him. Sleeping? Grant said. No, neither am I. Grant wrapped both hands around his cup. I want to say something, and I want you to hear it without deflecting. Cole looked at him. What you did in that hall could have gone 6 different ways badly, Grant said. You knew that when you moved. You moved anyway, and you moved with enough calm that the situation stayed manageable. I have been in this work for 23 years, and I have watched people with far more experience freeze in smaller moments. I want you to know that I saw what it cost you to step forward, and I am telling you directly, it was the right decision, and you executed it well. Cole held the ambassador's gaze. Thank you, he said. Don't deflect. I'm not deflecting. Thank you. I mean it, Grant nodded once, and drank. They sat in silence for a while. The ship moved through the dark at a speed that made the stars outside the narrow viewport look fixed and still, the way they always did at transit velocity, that illusion of stillness inside enormous motion. She asked to be there, Cole said. He had not planned to say it. It came out the way things do when you have been turning them over for hours. The princess. Aldrich told us she came to him. She wanted to be in the ceremony. I know. She's 17.
I know that too. Grant was quiet for a moment.
Some people arrive at their choices earlier than others. The age is part of the story, not the whole of it. It changes what it meant that she was standing there. It does, Grant agreed. It means she was not placed, she placed herself, which makes the whole event more interesting, not less. She's going to be someone, Cole said. She already is someone. Grant finished his drink and stood. Get some sleep, Lieutenant. Debrief is in 8 hours. Grant went back down the corridor. Cole sat alone in the small common area, with the viewport and the false stillness of moving stars. He thought about the addendum. 4 paragraphs. Donna Alves and her reading glasses and her fast-right questions. Otherin's voice saying, "The king wishes the human who raised the concern to be the one who resolves it." The dry scratch of the pen on a formal document in a corridor off a stone hall, on a planet that had not existed on any human map until 30 years ago. He thought about the rhythm in the hall after the signing. 400 palms on forearms, sound building in stone like a slow rising tide. He thought about what the deep space lanes meant in real numbers, not in percentages, in people. The families on the outer colonies who waited months for supply ships, the researchers on long-duration stations who ran low on medical supplies before the next scheduled run, the kids who had never seen Earth growing up at the edge of human-occupied space, who would now grow up with faster connections to the rest of everything. Those lanes existed tonight because a ceremony had paused, because an addendum had been drafted, because a lieutenant in the second row had recognized a face. He was not going to make more of it than it was. He was also not going to make less of it. He picked the tablet back up and read the second Verithian article one more time, the one that quoted the anonymous court official. He stopped at a line near the end, which noted that the living representative, the king's daughter, had completed the ceremony with full composure and had been seen afterward at the reception, speaking with members of both delegations. The piece described her as poised. Cole thought that was close, but not quite right. The word he would have used was ready. She had been ready, in the way that people are ready when they chose to be somewhere and understood why they chose it, when they walked towards something with their eyes open and their hands steady and their voice available, waiting to be used. He filed that away, set the tablet down, finally closed his eyes. Outside, the stars held their false stillness. The ship moved through the dark, and somewhere behind them, on a planet carved from a black mountain, an agreement sat in a sealed archive with 4 paragraphs attached to it that had not existed at the start of the evening. Small things, the kind of small things that hold large futures in them, the way a bolt holds a hull, unremarkable until you need it. Cole slept in the morning. He would be unremarkable again. Tonight, that was more than enough.